Hello, Algebra 1. This is our video key for section 8.2, Completing the Square, part 1. Part 1, all we're going to concern ourselves with is getting our quadratic equation and identifying b divided by 2, and b divided by 2 squared. So let's get started by taking a look at number 1. Here's number 1, a squared minus 8a minus 24 equals negative 4. Now, first thing we need to look at with completing the square is we have our variable terms on the left side and our constant on the right side. So we need to move this 24 over here. A squared and a are in their correct spot. They're variable terms. They're on the left. Our constant needs to be over on the right. So we're going to add 24 to each side. So on the left side, we'll get 8 squared minus 8a. The 24s cancel out. And on the right side, we'll get equals 20. Now we need to identify b over 2, and finally b over 2 squared. And b is our coefficient that goes with our middle term here, 8a. So our b is going to be negative 8. Our b over 2 will be negative 4. And when we square b over 2, we get 16. So there is our answer for number 1, b equals negative 8, b over 2 equals negative 4, and b over 2 squared equals 16. Number 2, we have a squared minus 6a plus 14 equals 9. So we need to rewrite this so our variable terms a squared and 6a are on the left side, and our constant is alone by itself on the right side of the equal sign. So I'm going to subtract 14 from each side. I'll end up with x squared minus 6a equals, because my 14s cancel out, 9 minus 14 is going to give me negative 5. So I'll have a squared minus 6a equals negative 5. And this is what I wanted, my variable terms on the left, my constant on the right. Now I need to identify b over 2, and finally b over 2 squared. b is the coefficient of my middle term right here, so b is going to be negative 6. b over 2, negative 6 over 2 equals negative 3, and negative 3 squared is 9. So there's my answer for number 2. b equals negative 6, b over 2 equals negative 3, b over 2 squared equals 9. Number 3, I have x squared minus 6x minus 31 equals negative 4. I want to rewrite this so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is on the right. So I want my x squared and my negative 6x excuse me, on the left, and my constant by itself on the right. So I'm going to add 31 to both sides. That'll leave me with x squared minus 6x. My 31s cancel out. Negative 4 plus 31 is going to be positive 27. So here's my equation. I have my variable terms on my left, constant alone on the right. So now I need to identify my b over 2, and my b over 2 squared. Well, b is my coefficient of my middle term, so that'll be negative 6. b over 2 will be negative 6 divided by 2, so that's going to be negative 3. And b over 2 squared, well, that's going to be negative 3 squared, and that'll be 9. So my answer to number 3 is b equals negative 6, b over 2 equals negative 3, b over 2 squared equals 9. Number 4, m squared minus 10m plus 22 equals 6. Need to rewrite the equation so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is by itself on the right. So I want my m terms on the left, constant on the right. I'm going to subtract 22 from each side. I'll get m squared minus 10m. 22's cancel out, equals 6 minus 22. That's going to be a negative 16. So I have my variable terms on the left, and that's what I want. I have my constant alone on the right, so now I need to identify b over 2, and b over 2 squared. Well, b is the coefficient of my middle term, so that's negative 10. b over 2 is that coefficient divided by 2. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. And b over 2 squared is going to be 25. So My answer to number 4 is b equals negative 10, b over 2 equals negative 5, b over 2 squared equals 25. Number 5, we have v squared plus 12v minus 37 equals negative 9. I need to rewrite this equation so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is on the right. So I'm going to add 37 to both sides. I'll get v squared plus 12v. My 37's cancel out. That will equal negative 9 plus 37, which is going to be 28. So I have my variable terms on the left, my constant on the right. Now I need to identify b over 2, and b over 2 squared. Well, b is the coefficient of my middle term, that's 12. b over 2 is 12 divided by 2, or 6. And b over 2 squared, that's going to be 6 squared, or 36. So my answer to number 5, b equals 12, b over 2 equals 6, b over 2 squared equals 36. Number 6, we have n squared minus 20n plus 38 equals 2. Need to rewrite this so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is on the right. I'm going to subtract 38 from each side. I will get n squared minus 20, 38's cancel out, equals a negative 36. So I have my variable terms on the left, my constant on the right. Now I need to identify b over 2, and finally b over 2 squared. B is the coefficient of my middle term, that's negative 20. B over 2 is negative 20 divided by 2, that'll give you negative 10. And b over 2 squared, that'll be negative 10 squared, which is 100. So my answer to number 6 is b equals negative 20, b over 2 equals negative 10, b over 2 squared equals 100. Number 7, we're given n squared plus 20n plus 44 equals negative 7. Need to rewrite this so my variable terms on the left, my constants on the right. So I'm going to subtract 44 from each side. I'll end up with n squared plus 20n, my 44's cancel each other out, equals negative 7 minus 54. That's going to give me a negative 51. So now my variables on the left, constant on the right. I need to identify b over 2, and b over 2 squared. B is my coefficient of my middle term, which is 20. B over 2, that's going to be 20 divided by 2, that'll be 10. B over 2 squared, that's going to be 10 squared, or 100. So there's my answer to number 7. B equals 20, B over 2 equals 10, and B over 2 squared equals 100. Here's number 8. We have v squared minus 10v minus 100 equals negative 4. I need to rewrite this equation so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is on the right. So I'm going to add 100 to each side. I will get v squared minus 10v, my hundreds cancel each other out, equals, well, negative 4 plus 100, that is 96. So now I have my variable terms on the left, my constant on the right. So I can identify b over 2, and b over 2 squared. B is my coefficient of my middle term, so that's negative 10. B over 2, that's going to be negative 10 divided by 2, that'll be negative 5. B over 2 squared, that's going to be negative 5 squared, or 25. So my answer to number 8 is b equals negative 10, b over 2 equals negative 5, and b over 2 squared equals 25. Number 9, we have x squared plus 6x minus 44 equals negative 4. I need to rewrite this equation so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is on the right. So I'm going to add 44 to each side, and I get x squared plus 6x. My 44s are going to cancel each other out. Negative 4 plus 44, that equals 40. So I have my variable terms on the left, my constant over there by itself on the right. So I can identify b over 2, and finally b over 2 squared. Well, b is the coefficient of my middle term, that's 6. b over 2 is 6 divided by 2, that's 3. b over 2 squared, that's 3 squared, or 9. So my answer to number 9 is b equals 6, b over 2 equals 3, b over 2 squared equals 9. Number 10, we're given n squared plus 20n plus 86 equals negative 5. Need to rewrite this so my variable terms are on the left, my constant is by itself on the right. So I'm going to subtract 86 from each side. I'm going to get n squared plus 20n. My 86's cancel each other out. Where I get negative 5 minus negative 86, that's going to give me a negative 91. So now I have my variable terms on the left, constant by itself on the right. So I can identify b over 2, and finally b over 2 squared. B is the coefficient of my middle term, that's 20. B over 2, that's 20 divided by 2, that'll be 10. Finally, b over 2 squared, that's 10 squared, or 100. So there's my answer to number 10. B equals 20, b over 2 equals 10, b over 2 squared equals 100. So hopefully going through these examples helped you find a way to find b over 2, b over 2 squared. Hopefully if you're still stuck or struggling on some of these problems, please email me so we can work these out. Our next exercise will be completing the square part 2, where we'll take these numbers and we'll finish the process of completing the square.